Ethan didn't need to see the broken latch on the pool gate to know. He could smell her, that cloying synthetic coconut scent she favored, mixed now with the unmistakable chlorine odor of his pool. The scent of absolute violation. The first time, 3 weeks ago, he'd found her perfectly folded, monogrammed beach towel draped over a lounge chair, and the remnants of a half-eaten artisanal protein bar floating near the deep end. He'd been polite, firm. He'd walked the 50 feet to the property line, knocked on the pristine white door of the McMansion next door, and delivered a measured warning. "Karen," he had said, forcing a smile that felt like concrete cracking. "I need you to understand that my pool is not a neighborhood amenity. It's private property. If you need to swim, the community center pool is 3 blocks south." Karen, chin tilted so high she might have been looking at distant storm clouds, had replied, "Oh, Ethan, don't be dramatic. I was just cooling off after a run. Your fence is practically falling down, darling." I hardly broke in. "Besides, what's a little dip between neighbors?" That was Karen's philosophy. Boundaries were suggestions, rules were for the poor, and anything that improved her day was a moral imperative. The second time, last Thursday, she hadn't even bothered with the towel. He found the muddy footprints. She must have taken a shortcut through the flower bed, and a small gold hoop earring snagged on the safety net he'd installed after the first incident. That time, Ethan had called the non-emergency police line. They'd taken the report, filed it under neighbor dispute, and suggested he install better security. "We can't spare a unit for a misdemeanor trespassing over a swimming pool, sir," the board dispatcher had informed him. "Just try to resolve it peaceably." Peaceably. Ethan now stood on his paved patio, the late afternoon sun baking the back of his neck, staring at the gate. The latch he'd reinforced with stainless steel screws just yesterday was bent, the small metal hook twisted like cheap candy wrapper. The third time. The third violation in less than a month. This wasn't just trespassing. This was calculated malice, a direct challenge to his authority, his home, his sanity. He walked over to his laptop, throwing the broken latch onto the patio table with a resonant clang. He pulled up the legal advice document he'd drafted. "Cease and desist, threat of civil suit, restraining order, all slow, all requiring documentation, lawyers, court dates, a war of attrition he couldn't afford against Karen, whose husband, a wealthy venture capitalist, had the legal team of a small nation on retainer." She knew this. She counted on him backing down. Not this time. Ethan's gaze drifted from the screen to the pool. It was an oasis, yes, but it was also a weapon in a subtle psychological war, and he was tired of being the only one getting wounded. He closed the laptop. The word "charged" echoed in his mind, taken directly from the exasperated text message he'd sent his best friend an hour ago. "I swear, I want to give Karen a lesson so charged she never comes within 100 feet of my property again." He was a low-voltage electrical engineer by trade, specializing in passive security systems for commercial sites. He knew electricity. More importantly, he knew how to deter. He knew how to make a boundary feel like a boundary without causing lasting harm. He pulled his truck out of the driveway, heading not to the hardware store for a new lock, but to an industrial agricultural supply depot 40 miles away. The next few hours were a blur of meticulous, focused work. He purchased and installed an animal perimeter containment system, a specialized, high-intensity, low-amperage charger used for livestock fencing. The key word was charger, not power line. It was designed to deliver a non-lethal, painful jolt, a shock that would frighten, sting, and repel, but not injure. It was legal for property protection, a fact he had researched exhaustively after the second incident. He used slender, insulated wires, cleverly threading them along the metal frame of the pool gate and the thin top railing of the chain-link fence that bordered his property with Karen's. He disguised the main charge, lined with cheap solar-powered patio lighting that ran parallel to it, hiding the crucial deterrent wires in plain sight. The charger unit itself, a sturdy gray box, was mounted discreetly on the exterior wall of his shed and wired to a standard outdoor outlet, complete with a surge protector. A small, almost invisible switch was placed inside the shed, ready to be flipped. As dusk settled, casting long, purple shadows across the water, Ethan stood back to examine his work. It was invisible unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. The fence looked normal. The gate looked normal, save for the replaced heavy-duty latch he'd just installed. He pulled out a simple voltmeter. Click. He flipped the switch in the shed. A small, steady green light illuminated on the charging unit. He pressed the voltmeter's probe onto the top rail of the fence. The display immediately jumped. 5,000 V 5,000 volts. Enough to feel like a punch from a ghost. Enough to drop an adult to their knees in sheer panic and pain. Enough to make the heart race and the muscles seize for a second. But the amperage, the killer, was negligible. It was a deterrent designed for thick-hided cows. For soft-skinned Karen, it would be pure, instant terror. Ethan retracted the probe, the small hiss of the charging fence barely audible over the night sounds. His hands were shaking, not from fear of getting caught, but from the adrenaline of crossing a moral line. He was actively setting a trap for his neighbor. It felt wrong, but every time he thought of the bent latch, the dismissive police and Karen's smug face, the feeling of wrongness dissolved into righteous fury. He walked back to the shed and pulled out the final component. A small, weatherproofed motion sensor camera disguised as a planter lamp, aimed directly at the now electrified gate latch. He needed proof. He needed evidence not just of the trespass, but of the lesson being delivered. He set the camera, checked the feed on his phone, a perfect, wide view of the gate and the path from Karen's yard, and sat down on the patio, the heat of the day radiating off the pavement. He didn't have to wait long. He heard the familiar sound first, a slight shift in the underbrush, the gentle scuff-scuff of expensive designer sandals on gravel. It was 11:37 p.m. Karen, he realized, was a creature of habit. Late, when the moon was hidden and she assumed he was asleep, lost in his oversized, empty house. Ethan didn't move. He held his breath, watching the phone screen. A shadow detached itself from the line of cypress trees. Karen, in a pale blue swimsuit, a towel slung over her shoulder like a cape. She moved with a practiced arrogance, already owning the space. She walked directly toward the pool gate, paused only for a moment to glance back at her house, her only concession to stealth, and reached out a hand. Her fingers, adorned with a massive glittering engagement ring, wrapped around the heavy-duty stainless steel latch, twisting it to open the gate. A sound ripped through the quiet suburban night, a sound Ethan had only heard in simulations. It was the crackle of energy meeting flesh, a wet, horrifying zzzt that lasted maybe 2 full seconds. Karen didn't scream. Her body simply locked, rigid and instantaneous, her entire frame illuminated by a brief internal flash of white light. The towel dropped. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed, not with a cry, but with a sound like a sack of wet sand hitting the pavement, landing right next to the electrified latch. The green light on the charger in the shed flickered, momentarily overloading, then stabilized back to a steady, patient glow, ready for the next touch. Ethan surged to his feet, his heart hammering in his chest like a trapped bird. The plan was executed, the lesson delivered. But seeing her lying there, silent, motionless, next to his beautiful, now silent pool, a sudden, horrifying coldness washed over him. He was a professional. He had tested the current. He knew she was fine. But in the quiet, charged darkness, the reality of what he had done, the premeditated act of inflicting pain on another person, regardless of her crime, hit him with the force of his own deterrent. He looked at the small monitor in his hand. The video was captured, proof of the crime and proof of the consequence. But now, she was just lying there, and he had to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. The phone was slick with the residual nervous sweat on Ethan's palm. He held it to his ear, his gaze still fixed on Karen's motionless form by the gate. She was a dark, crumpled shape against the pale patio stone. The digital clock on his phone screen glared 11:41 p.m. The line clicked, and a voice, groggy and thick with sleep, answered. "Yeah, hello? Ethan, what the hell, man?" Mark, it happened," Ethan whispered, his voice catching on the word happened as if it were a shard of glass. "What?" Did she finally use the community pool? Congratulations. Now go to bed. No, the fence. I flipped the switch, Mark. She touched the latch. She went down. She's not moving. Silence stretched across the line, thicker and more terrifying than the quiet night. Ethan could hear Mark's ragged intake of breath. You did what? The livestock thing? The 5,000 volts you were joking about? You actually... Mark's voice was suddenly wide awake, laced with pure terror. God, Ethan, you could have killed her. I told you not to mess with that kind of voltage, no matter the amperage. Did you call an ambulance? No, shut up and listen. Ethan snapped, the panic making him aggressive. It's a low-amperage pulse charger. It's designed to be non-lethal. It just gives an immediate stunning shock. She's breathing, I can see her chest moving. She just locked up and dropped. I already turned the charger off. That was my first call, I swear. That's good. That's something? Okay. Don't go near her. Whatever you do, do not touch her. You call 911 right now and report an unconscious trespasser on your property. You let them handle it. You don't know what kind of damage you did. Head trauma from the fall, maybe. Ethan looked at the camera feed again. Karen shifted. A low, ragged groan finally broke the silence. She pushed herself up onto her elbows, her face obscured by her hair, her movements uncoordinated like a newly born fawn. Too late. Ethan breathed into the phone. She's up. Mark, she's pissed. She's not hurt, she's enraged. Karen slowly lifted her head. Even from 50 feet away, illuminated only by the faint spill of light from her own colossal house, Ethan could see the pure, unadulterated venom in her face. It wasn't the face of a woman who had been shocked. It was the face of a predatory animal caught in a spring trap. She clutched her right hand, the one that had touched the latch, to her chest, rocking slightly as if trying to recenter her reality. She didn't try to get up immediately. She stayed there, kneeling, looking at the pool gate, then across the yard toward Ethan's house, a silent, burning promise of hellfire in her eyes. She saw you, didn't she? Mark asked, his voice now flat, resigned. I was at the window. She knows. Then the police are coming, Ethan. And the lawyers. You've crossed the line from a neighbor dispute to assault with a weapon, a concealed, booby-trapped weapon. You need to dismantle that whole setup right now. I mean every wire, every component. Make it look like a regular, boring fence again. We can worry about the video later. Mark was right. Speed and immediate deniability were paramount. Ethan jammed the phone into his jeans pocket, leaving Mark muttering panicked advice, and sprinted to the shed. The small gray charger unit was cool to the touch. He ripped the power cord from the outlet, then quickly unbolted the box from the wall, tossing it into a heavy, custom-built metal case he'd prepared for the storage of the system. He moved with the practiced economy of a professional engineer, his hands flying over the fence line. The wires were thin, easy to detach. He unwrapped the insulated lines from the wrought iron, pulling the solar lights he'd used as a shield down with them. Within 5 minutes, the entire system, wires, clamps, the main charger box, was sealed in the storage case inside the shed, hidden beneath gardening equipment. He returned to the patio, breathing heavily. Karen was gone. He ran to the gate. The new heavy-duty latch was still closed. No sign of damage this time, only the faint, acrid smell of ozone hanging in the humid air. Where she had collapsed, there was a minute patch of dampness, probably pool water from her swimsuit, and nestled in the crack of the paving stone, a single minuscule piece of metallic foil. It was the decorative coating from her fingernail, a tiny charred chip of silver polish. The only physical evidence of the encounter besides the video. He swept it up, placing it carefully in a small, sterile plastic bag from his first aid kit. As he walked back toward the house, he checked the camera feed one last time. It had captured the entire event, from her smug approach to the instantaneous zit and the subsequent fall. It was perfect video evidence of the trespass, but even more devastating evidence of the shocking consequence. He knew he couldn't keep it on his phone. Too risky? He used his home network to transfer the file to an encrypted external drive, then wipe the camera's internal storage clean. The entire process took another frantic 15 minutes. At 12:05 a.m., Ethan stood in his kitchen, heart still pounding, every nerve ending screaming a fight-or-flight response. The house was spotless. The fence was inert. and the only proof of his extreme act was locked away in a Faraday cage in his safe. He poured a glass of water, trying to force his trembling hand to be steady. The silence of the night had returned, a heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to promise an even greater violence to come. Karen's immediate retreat was not a sign of surrender. It was the sound of a loaded gun being cocked. He knew the next phase of the war would begin at dawn. He just didn't know how. Lawsuit? Police report? Personal public humiliation? He decided to go over to the property line. He needed to look at her house, to see the fortress from which the inevitable attack would be launched. He crept to the edge of his lawn. Karen's house was completely dark, silent, and imposing. But as Ethan stood there, staring, a single light flickered on in an upstairs window, the massive, opulent master bathroom. And then, a sound. Not a scream, but something far more chilling. A long, mournful, shuddering sob that was instantly cut off, followed by the rapid, frantic tapping of a phone screen. Karen wasn't just calling her lawyer. She was composing a story. She was framing the narrative. Ethan turned and ran back inside. He had acted out of justice, but she was about to act out of pure theatrical vengeance. He felt his life closing in around him, the walls of his beautiful private home suddenly feeling like the bars of a very expensive cage. He checked his front door camera feed. Nothing yet. No patrol cars, no dark sedans. Just as he was about to switch off the screen and finally try to breathe, a colossal black SUV, a Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows and custom chrome, pulled up to the curb. It was too fast, too aggressive for a mere neighbor visit. It was Richard, Karen's husband, home from his business trip. The driver's side door swung open, and Richard, a hulking man in a perfectly tailored suit, emerged. He wasn't running. He was striding. He didn't look at his own house. His gaze was locked, burning, directly on Ethan's front door. But it was the passenger door opening that brought the blood freezing in Ethan's veins. A uniformed man, the silver badge on his chest catching the pale beam of a nearby street lamp, stepped out. He was followed by a woman in plain clothes holding a notepad. They walked directly to Richard, who pointed a finger, not at his house, but across the lawn, straight at Ethan's front entrance. Richard's voice, though muffled by the distance, was a low, terrifying growl that carried on the still air. "That man," Richard said, his tone absolute, "attempted to electrocute my wife. I want him arrested, now!" The sight of the police officer and the plain-clothes detective standing next to Richard's hulking figure was a physical blow. The three figures stood silhouetted against the blinding beam of the porch light, transforming Ethan's meticulously maintained front porch into a crime scene. This wasn't a warning. This was an inquisition. Ethan forced himself to take 2 deep, stabilizing breaths, the engineer in him attempting to override the primal panic. He unclenched his jaw and opened the door. "Gentlemen, and ma'am, to what do I owe the pleasure at this hour?" Ethan asked, injecting a forced calm into his voice, making sure to acknowledge the detective, prioritizing composure over aggression. Richard, towering and radiating the potent scent of expensive cologne and contained fury, didn't wait for the officers. He lunged forward, stopping only when the uniformed officer, whose name tag read Sergeant Davies, subtly shifted his weight. "You know why we're here." "You psycho!" Richard spat, his voice a low, gravelly snarl. "You tried to kill my wife. You booby-trapped your fence. You're coming with us." The detective, a sharp-featured woman with tired eyes named Detective Miller, stepped smoothly past Richard, holding up a hand. "Mr. Ethan Cole, I'm Detective Miller. This is Sergeant Davies. We are investigating a complaint of aggravated assault and battery resulting from an incident that allegedly occurred on your property just before midnight." Her voice was professional, devoid of judgment, and therefore far more intimidating than Richard's rage. "I have no knowledge of any assault." "Detective," Ethan replied, leaning slightly on the doorframe, trying to appear relaxed despite the tremor in his legs. "However, I did witness an incident of trespassing just before midnight, which I am prepared to report." "Trespassing?" Richard barked, stepping up to Ethan's shoulder. "She was trying to cool off, you lunatic." "She didn't deserve to be electrocuted." She was attempting to break into my secure pool area for the third time in as many weeks, Richard, Ethan corrected, his eyes locking with the detective's. I have prior police reports filed regarding her illegal entry onto my property. In fact, I replaced the gate latch yesterday because she bent the last one trying to force entry. Detective Miller's expression shifted, acknowledging the complexity of the situation. Mr. Cole, regardless of the prior history, setting a device to deliver an electrical shock, a trap, as Mr. Hayes here describes it, is a serious offense. We need to see the device. I'm happy to cooperate with your investigation, Detective, Ethan said, pushing the door open fully. Please feel free to inspect the property. But I can assure you there is no electrical device on the fence. It's a standard residential wrought iron gate. Richard scoffed. He cleaned it up. He's an engineer, Miller. He can dismantle that junk in minutes. Karen's hand is completely red and swollen, and she nearly blacked out. The evidence is on her! And the evidence of the continuous trespassing is on my police record, Richard, Ethan countered, moving toward the backyard, gesturing for them to follow. You see the depth of the property line, correct? She has absolutely no right to be here. The group moved through the house, the tense, silent procession of justice, vengeance, and a desperate defense. When they reached the patio, the pool gleamed under the spotlights, innocent and inviting. The newly installed latch was firm and gleaming. The solar lights were quietly charging. Detective Miller and Sergeant Davies meticulously examined the fence line, Davies even using a gloved hand to briefly test the latch. They found nothing. No loose wires, no humming charger, no warning signs that were not mandated by law. Mr. Cole, we have a statement from Mrs. Hayes alleging she received a severe electrical shock upon touching this latch, Miller stated, her voice tight with professional doubt. Do you deny that she was shocked? Ethan paused, realizing this was the moment of his greatest risk. Total denial was safest, but it would make the video evidence seem manufactured later. He chose the subtle truth. I deny setting a trap designed to inflict injury, Detective. I had ongoing security issues. After 2 prior break-ins, I took steps to secure my private property, but I assure you, at this moment, the fence is inert. Furthermore, the question isn't whether she touched the fence, but why she was touching my private, secured gate at nearly midnight in a swimsuit. He pulled the small, sealed plastic bag from his pocket. When she collapsed right here, he pointed to the paving stone. She left a piece of physical evidence. Not of the shock, but of the trespass. He held up the bag containing the tiny charred speck of silver fingernail polish. This is a piece of her acrylic nail broken off when she forced the latch. It confirms she was illegally attempting to access the area. This demonstrates intent to trespass. Before we discuss assault, we need to discuss invasion. Richard's face, which had been contorted in smug anticipation, flushed a deep, alarming red. He knew his wife's story was built entirely on her victimhood, not her actions. That's circumstantial garbage, Richard bellowed. Sergeant Davies stepped in, placing a hand on Richard's chest to keep him back. Mr. Hayes, calm down. Let the detective work. Mr. Cole, where is the device, if it existed? It does not exist now, Sergeant. I can't speak to your wife's experience, but I can state categorically that any electrical device on my property meets all residential and electrical codes and is purely for deterrence against ongoing invasion, which is a right I hold as a property owner. And if your wife's hands are red, perhaps she should focus on stopping her criminal behavior. Miller stared hard at Ethan, calculating. The man was calm, cooperative, and, most dangerously, had a documented history of being the victim, with multiple police reports against Karen. We will need to check your shed. Mr. Cole, the power source for a device like that would need to be close by. Be my guest, Ethan said, tossing the shed key onto the patio table. He knew the box was securely hidden, buried under a tarp and gardening supplies in a locked, shielded case. Davies and Miller went to the shed. Richard, left alone with Ethan, leaned in close, his voice dropping to a terrifying confidential level. You think you're smart, Ethan? You think your little property rights loophole is going to save you? My wife is a public figure. You just created a narrative of a powerful woman being assaulted by a vigilante psycho. I own the judge and jury in this county. I will sue you for everything you own, down to the pavers under your feet. And I will make sure you never work as an engineer again. Richard, I suggest you retain a lawyer specializing in property law, because while you focus on the shock, I'm focused on the third broken latch, Ethan replied, holding his ground, meeting the man's gaze. I have evidence that completely invalidates your wife's claim of accidental entry. And I assure you, unlike the gate, my evidence is still fully charged. The shed door creaked open. Miller and Davies emerged, empty-handed. But Miller carried a small, portable tool. We found the outdoor outlet, Mr. Cole. And we found this. Miller held up the device, a small, highly sensitive current meter. This registers a spike in voltage fluctuation around 11:38 p.m., coinciding exactly with Mrs. Hayes' timeline. You can dismantle the wiring, but this tells us a temporary high-voltage draw occurred. Now, Mr. Cole, tell us where you put the charger. Because right now, this charge is escalating from assault to reckless endangerment. Ethan's blood ran cold. He hadn't accounted for the surge protector acting as a timestamp or the residual electromagnetic field. He had just lost his defense of deniability. He took another breath, the weight of the moment crashing down. His hand went to his back pocket, where he still carried the encrypted USB drive containing the video. Detective Miller, Ethan said, his voice now entirely devoid of fear, replaced by a sudden, chilling resolve. Before we proceed, I believe we need to review a different piece of evidence. A piece of visual evidence that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Mrs. Hayes was not an innocent victim, but a deliberate criminal in the act of breaking and entering. He looked past the detective, straight at Richard, who suddenly looked less like a corporate titan and more like a man watching his world fracture. The silent exchange hung in the air. You brought the police to my house, Richard. Now, I bring the surveillance. The silence that fell over the patio was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic chirp of the cicadas returning to their nocturnal symphony. Richard's jaw worked silently, his face contorted in a mask of fury and dawning realization. Detective Miller's tired eyes narrowed, the hint of professional curiosity replacing her initial skepticism. Visual evidence, Mr. Cole, Detective Miller repeated, her voice cautious. Where is this stored? On an encrypted external drive, Detective, Ethan replied, pulling the small silver USB drive from his pocket. He was not going to let them take possession of the original file. I can play it for you now in my office. We need to establish the context of Mrs. Hayes' entry before we discuss anything else. The procession moved from the humid darkness of the backyard to the sterile, climate-controlled cool of Ethan's small home office. Richard hovered aggressively as Ethan slid the drive into his desktop computer and brought the video file to the screen. This recording is time-stamped at 11:37 p.m. The exact moment Mrs. Hayes claims she was innocently seeking a late-night swim, Ethan narrated, his voice steady, formal, like a deposition. Watch closely. The three gathered around the monitor. Miller and Davies stood side by side, professional and observant, while Richard leaned over Ethan's shoulder, breathing heavily. The video began. Karen, moving with stealthy confidence, approaching the gate. The camera's night vision gave her figure an eerie, washed-out quality. There. Ethan paused the footage just as Karen's hand reached the latch. Note the force. This is not a passive attempt to open a slightly ajar gate, Detective. This is a deliberate, forceful twist, applying pressure to break the lock I installed yesterday after the last trespass. He pressed play. On screen, Karen's fingers closed around the stainless steel latch. The air immediately filled with that horrifying, sharp zzz sound that had torn the night. Karen's body seized, rigid, illuminated by a brief, unnatural flash of blue light against the black water. The movement was instant, violent, and complete. She dropped like a marionette whose strings had been cut, hitting the stone pavement with a heavy thud. The footage clearly showed the power of the non-lethal deterrent. It was shocking to watch, a stark, visceral depiction of consequence. Ethan fast-forwarded a few agonizing seconds to where he, himself, appeared in the background, sprinting to his shed, and here, at 11:41 p.m., you can see me immediately turning off the power source, Sergeant. My intention was purely deterrence, followed by immediate neutralization of the hazard once the immediate threat, the trespass, had been resolved. He paused the video on the still, slumped figure of Karen. The office was silent, save for the hum of the computer. Detective Miller finally broke the silence, exhaling slowly. "Well, Mr. Cole, that certainly changes the narrative surrounding her intent. This is not a casual trespass. The force used to manipulate the latch, coupled with the prior reports, suggests criminal breaking and entering." She looked at Richard, her tired eyes now hard and cold. "Your wife wasn't a victim, Mr. Hayes. She was in the commission of a crime." Richard, however, was already recovering. He slammed his fist onto the desk, rattling the monitor. "She was still electrocuted. That's attempted murder. You're still admitting you rigged the fence, you smug bastard. You can't legally do this. You just demonstrated you're a danger. Delete that video, Cole, right now. You delete it, we pull the complaint. Otherwise, I will ensure the full weight of my legal team crushes you. You'll be in debt for the rest of your pathetic life fighting this reckless endangerment charge." "Blackmail, Richard?" Ethan asked calmly, pushing his chair back. "That's a felony. And the video is backed up. I'm an engineer. I take precautions. This footage proves I was defending my property from a repeat offender whom the police failed to deter twice. It proves the moment of shock, and it proves the immediate disabling of the device. This video is my defense, and it is my offense." Sergeant Davies stepped in, pulling Richard back by the arm. "Mr. Hayes, you need to step away. This is now a vastly more complex situation. We need to confer with the DA." He looked at Miller. "The assault charge is now almost impossible to prove. Defense will argue justification and proportionality given the low amperage and the clear intent to break and enter." "Agreed," Miller said, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Mr. Cole, we are seizing the laptop and the drive as evidence for the investigation. We will require a full statement from you tomorrow morning. But I want to be clear. You are still under investigation for the electrical device. We're leaving the laptop and just taking the drive for now. Don't touch this computer or the internal files on it until we process this." "The video is my intellectual property, Detective," Ethan corrected smoothly. "But I will provide you with a certified copy of the file on a separate, non-encrypted drive, along with the electrical specifications of the livestock charger used, demonstrating its non-lethal, deterrent-only nature. I require a receipt for the evidence taken." The officers reluctantly agreed, accepting the professionally prepared files Ethan had already printed and labeled. They understood they were dealing not with a simple suburban homeowner, but a meticulous engineer who had planned for every contingency, including their arrival. As the detectives walked to the door, Richard remained, his eyes burning into Ethan's soul. "You've made a mistake." "Ethan!" Richard hissed, his face pale with suppressed rage. "You think a court battle is the worst I can do? I will ruin your life outside of court. You have a small consulting business, don't you? I have friends who control 80% of the defense contracts in this state. You will never get a contract again. You will be a social pariah. You will be defined by the moment you electrocuted a woman." Ethan walked around his desk, meeting Richard at the center of the room. The engineer was shorter, leaner, but suddenly possessed of an unnerving stillness. "Richard," Ethan said quietly, his voice dangerously low, "you think I put a non-lethal shock fence on my gate to defend a pool? No, I put it there to set a boundary you refuse to acknowledge. And you know what the video proves? It proves your wife is an entitled bully who commits crimes, and you're a corporate thug who abuses his power to cover for her. You came here tonight to intimidate me into silence, and I gave you the opposite." Ethan looked at the back of the retreating officers. "They have the evidence now, Richard. But what they don't have is the control. I built this system. I know its flaws and I know its strengths. And I know how to disseminate information. You are threatening my financial stability. I assure you, your wife's public image is far more fragile than my engineering career." Richard didn't move, the threat of violence shimmering between them. "She's going to be fine, Richard. She just got taught a lesson in consequences," Ethan continued, allowing a cold, thin smile to touch his lips. "But you and Karen just handed me the weapon you feared I was hiding. You brought the state to validate my footage. You made it official." Richard turned to follow the officers, pausing at the threshold. "You'll regret this, Cole. This isn't over. It's just starting." "I know," Ethan replied, looking past Richard at the darkened street. He picked up his own phone and quickly typed a message to Mark, his friend. "The video is safe. They took the copy. Phase 2 was a go. Time to turn the tide. He had one last card to play, a piece of engineering that Richard, for all his money, could never anticipate. Ethan walked back to his desk, pulled up the schematics for the containment system, and opened the communication channels for the local engineering and property rights forums.